Okay, good morning everybody. It is Sunday morning and week 31 of our study of the book of Genesis. If things go according to plan, it'll be our last session on Genesis, and we should be able to wrap the book up today. But let's go ahead and pray and then we'll dive in. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the journey that this has been, for both the opportunity and the privilege to get to gather together in your name and in your word, and to spend so much time just digging into what you've preserved for us. Father, as we continue today, just ask that your Spirit be present and prevalent, that you guide us into your word, and that you bring life through it and to us. And Father, I just ask that you bless this time so richly that what we do and say blesses you. Father, we love you, we thank you, we give you all honor, all glory, and all praise. In Jesus' name, amen. So, weeks 1 through 20, if you're trying to check it out, pause and check it out. And weeks 21 through 30, which includes last week. And last week we did Genesis 48 and more than half of 49. But rather than going into all that again, I'm just going to cover the basics. In 48, Jacob calls for Joseph, and Joseph and his sons come, and Jacob adopts Joseph's sons as his own. Basically, he does this to show approval, but in so doing, he gives Joseph a double portion of Jacob's inheritance by giving him not just himself, but 2 sons to inherit through. He also says, I've said Ephraim my whole life, and it looks like it's Ephraim or Ephraim, but I'm pretty sure it's Ephraim. I'm not going to be able to change how I say it. But Ephraim over Manasseh. Manasseh was the elder of the two. We're going to see a little touch of Joseph's feelings on that, I think, in this last chapter. But Jacob very deliberately sets one over the other, blesses them, adopts them as his own, takes them as his own. And then we go over into Genesis 49, and Jacob blesses all of his sons, basically speaks a word over them. Not a happy occasion for most of them. In fact, many of them, beginning with Reuben, it's a denouncement where he speaks against their bad character traits, their bad qualities, the actions of the past. He, in his last benediction seems like the wrong word, but his last speaking over them is making sure to pronounce his displeasure with certain types of behavior, certain activities. But he also lifts up, say, Judah and Joseph. They were both raised above the others by a large amount. They, like Joseph, clearly was loved by Jacob and clearly blessed. But Judah really stepped up. Like, even in the narrative, we see that Judah, even in his mistakes, he always stepped up. Even when it was the elder brother's role to do right, Reuben fell short, but Judah always stepped up. And he's not only blessed, he's acknowledged, and the blessing that he's given sets him up to be the patriarch, or the line through which the royalty would come and through which the Messiah would eventually come. Then we get to I got a typo there, that should say 28, not 38, but 49, 28. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 sons that he spoke of. And this is what their father said to them when he blessed them. He blessed them, everyone, with a blessing appropriate to him. And I find that particularly telling, just because it was like, he didn't just give them a blessing. He didn't just pronounce happy words or good wishes. He spoke words over them that were appropriate to each and every one of them, where they were and where they came from and what they were going to be. So, as we go in, we've got our 3 questions. It's like, where is the God of love in this passage? Why did he preserve this in his word, and how does this passage apply to my life? Look for the God of love. Look for his purpose and why it was written. And then ask yourself, like, okay, what does this mean for me? Because a lot of times, especially when we look at the Old Testament, they lived in a different world, different technology, different culture, everything. So we can't literally apply it, but the character of God is shown through the word. And so we look at that and we ask God to show us, what does this mean for our relationship with him? And that puts us in the last of the book of Genesis. So I'll scroll down because this thing never stays where I leave it. My Bible walks around. So, Genesis 49, verse 29. Then he, Jacob, commanded them and said to them, I am about to be gathered to my people. Which is an expression that means I'm going to die, but not just die. This is one of the things that we get the actually indication that they believed in the resurrection. They believed in an afterlife, because he's talking about being gathered to his spirit, joining the spirit of his fathers. It says, bury me with my fathers in the cave that is the field of Ephron the Hittite. So again, and just making this connection here, I'm about to be gathered to my people, but bury me with my fathers. Like, there's a separation here. It's one is who he is will be joined with who they are, but take this that's going to be dead and bury it with that is dead. So bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is opposite Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite as a burial site. Now, there's going to be a lot of phrasing that's going to have some poetic devices here. Again, remembering that when this is penned, it was penned from an oral tradition. So, there's some remembrance going on here, and also some record keeping, because earlier in Genesis we had the story where Abraham bought this field, but now we've got this kind of formalized phrasing that's, again, good for memory, good for repetition, but it's the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is opposite Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field from Ephron the Hittite as a burial site. So lots of reinforcement here. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it, purchased from the sons of Heth. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. The way this is phrased, if you read it and just take it at face value, it sounds like he finished speaking these blessings, said, bury me with my fathers, and then just died. Incredibly unlikely that it happened that pat, but it was very close to his death. And it's the word when can be translated as and, but basically it's a Hebrew word that it denotes that after these things, this is what happened. And then you have the expression, he drew his feet into the bed and breathed his last. It's just he drew up and breathed and died. He was done. And that ends the story of Jacob. And as we know from earlier, he was 147. He was 130 when he met Pharaoh and lived 17 years. 17 years afterwards. So 147. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. It's really the amount of love that went between Jacob and Joseph was so much, and it's, they've been together again 17 years. So it's I mean, it's not like he's still. I mean, if you just read this straight through, you can to lose the fact that so much time has gone. They've been together. They've been in contact again. They've not been separated like they were. They were separated for over 20 years when Joseph was sold into slavery, but Joseph is nearly 60 at this point. But the love that they had for each other was so deep, and when Jacob did pass, Joseph really felt the loss. And I find that it just makes me stop and wonder exactly how the relationship continued. I mean, Joseph is probably considered one of the wisest people in all of Egypt. I mean, he's the guy who got them through the famine. He got them through everything. He got Egypt literally, got the Pharaoh owning all of Egypt, all the people of Egypt. And Joseph still looks back to his father, still comes back. And the man was 147 years old. And like when he showed up, his eyes were already weak. He was not a lively man anymore, but there was something still going on here that Joseph felt a keen loss at his passing. So he wept over him, he kissed him, and Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. Now 40 days were required for it, for such is the period required for embalming. And the Egyptians wept for him 70 days. Now, everybody did not have the same relationship with Israel that Joseph did. And I think it's really significant to understand that, I mean, there is the embalming process, which I do not know the details. I know that Egypt had pretty much mastered it. So you've got an understandable 40 days of a mourning period, like maybe a national time of mourning. But very clearly, it's more than that. And the Hebrew, what's the word for it? They are very attached to numbers and meanings to numbers. So for it to be a 40-day period for the embalming, but then 70 days, and you got 7 and 10 both represented there. And I don't get really deep into all that because people will actually put more meaning to it than there actually is. But the fact that they wept almost as long more than was actually required was a huge tribute. Now, what their actual emotions were, I don't know, but the fact that as a nation they mourned the loss of this patriarch is huge, both in their respect for Israel, but also their respect for Joseph, which is, again, Joseph saved all their lives, but he also did it, and by doing it, he bought all of them. They basically, they lost everything they had, and yet they still celebrate and honor him. And I think that's worth note. When the days of mourning for him were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh. And this is interesting too, because we're talking, Pharaoh is here, and just under Pharaoh you've got Joseph. I mean, there's nobody in the land of Egypt higher than Joseph except Pharaoh. And we know that there was a lot of communication between them, a lot of trust there. We know that, but when Joseph made this request, he went through the channels. It doesn't say Joseph went to Pharaoh. It says Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, "If now I have found favor in your sight, please speak to Pharaoh, saying." I mean, he's going as a supplicant here. Incredibly humble. No presumption here at all. Saying, "My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am about to die. In my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now then, please let me go and bury my father. Then I will return." So there's some here, like here, there's an oath made to his father, but where he's got to go, but also the promise, like, I'll go there, I'll do it, but I'll come back. Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father as he made you swear." And again, just the humility there is, because, and it's something that you see throughout the Old Testament. See people in high positions, but when they went to make requests, they didn't just speak directly to the king. Trying to remember if it was Ezra or Nehemiah, it's kind of fuzzy, but one of them was the cupbearer. I think it was Ezra, was the cupbearer to the king, and he was mourning the condition of Israel, and he made his request in a roundabout way when he wanted to go and talk to, when I wanted to do stuff for Israel. It's just, there is built into all the narrative a real reverence and respect for the throne. And I think that's one of the things that we as Americans, we don't really, we can contact our government, leave that alone, directly if we want. We can write a letter straight to the president if we want to. But in this culture, you went through somebody. You did not presume. Even if you had like the second rank in all the country, you did not presume. And so it's important to kind of recognize that reality so that we understand more the gift that we've been given to address God. Like Jesus talks about, you can ask the Father directly in my name. And in fact, he tells them, like, I'm not saying that I'll ask for you. I'm saying you in my name can go in directly and talk to him. In Hebrews, where it talks about how you can boldly approach the throne of grace. Like, this is the culture. This is the reality of this time and later. Nobody directly approached the throne. Look at Esther, the queen, the beloved queen. She didn't just approach the throne without fear of death. The gift that we've been given is enormous. We have literally been given a right and a privilege that supersedes formality. We have direct access to the ear of the king. And so Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt. This was a big procession. And all the household of Joseph, and his brothers, and his father's household. They left only their little ones and their flocks and their herds in the land of Goshen. So basically the entire people of Israel have uprooted and come, along with all of the biggest, highest ranking people in the land of Egypt. Everybody is going. Chariots with teams of horses also went up with them, and it was a very great company. When they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, they mourned there with a very great and sorrowful lamentation. This is after 70 days of mourning. And they get here, and then they do it again. It's like they mourned there with a very great and sorrowful lamentation, and he observed 7 days of mourning for his father, again, Joseph. So after the 40 days of embalming, after the total of 70 days of mourning, they get here and do this, and then there's a Jewish ceremony for grieving the dead called, I think it's Shiva, and the 7 days of mourning, and here he observes this in the land where he's going to bury him. It's just, I'm kind of beating this to death, but there's so much reverence here. There is so much honor for the patriarch here that it's kind of mind-blowing. It feels like it's so deep that we as we read through it, we ought to stop and recognize. They kept stopping and recognizing and honoring. It's almost like to just read through this casually would be to do a disservice to what was going on here. We're talking about, again, they had to travel this distance. This was a big arrangement. It's not like they just loaded up the vans and drove over, stopped and got KFC on the way. They had to bring provisions. They had to bring an entourage. It was a huge, I don't know of any ceremony, any grieving. Maybe for the Queen of England there was something, but like 70 days, 2.5 months, and then you go make this travel, this journey on foot, and then you grieve again. Now when the inhabitants of the land, just to emphasize, more emphasis, the Canaanites saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, "This is a grievous mourning for the Egyptians." Therefore it was named Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. And that is like the meadow of Egypt or the mourning of Egypt. Like they renamed the place. This is the sad place. This is the grieving of Egypt. It was that big a deal. I mean, it's just astounding. And so his sons did for him as he commanded them, for his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, opposite Mamre, just in case there was any confusion of where it was, which Abraham had bought along with the field as a burial site from Ephron of the Hittite. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father. And so ends the full story of Jacob and the honor that was given Jacob. And here we go again. When Joseph's brothers had seen that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him?" This is what they were thinking when they first met up with Joseph. But that was 17 years ago at this point. And still, 17 years later, they're like, well, what if he's still holding a grudge, and our father being alive is the only thing that kept him from exacting revenge? And in their defense, if you go back one generation, Jacob and Esau made it very clear that he wasn't going to do anything to Jacob until his father had passed. So there's this, while my father lives, you're okay, but when my father is gone, you're in trouble. And so they're afraid, okay, our father is gone, there's nothing to save us. What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong we did to him? So they sent instructions to Joseph. Now, again, this is another point where they didn't speak directly to him. They sent a messenger. In this case, in this case, there's probably a more personal fear. Because, what if we remind him and he hadn't thought of it? It's like, oh, that's a good idea. Your father commanded us before he died, saying, I have strong doubts as to whether, Israel ever said this to them. This is what you shall say to Joseph. Please forgive, I beg you, the offense of your brothers and their sin, for they did you wrong. I feel very strongly that Jacob would have told Joseph exactly what he thought. Also, that does not sound like the Jacob who told them that some of them were vipers in the road and some of them were strong-boned donkeys and so forth. Anyway, it's pretty obvious what's going on here, and Joseph was no fool. So he said that Jacob said, "For they did you wrong. And now please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father." Again, they're laying it on thick. It's not just that we're the sons of your father, we're also the servants of the God of your father. So, if you did something to us, you'd be kind of doing something to him too. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And Then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to keep many people alive. Therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And so I'm looking at this whole story, and we see that by the time Joseph's brothers showed up, you could look at the way he tested them as kind of some revenge. You can't really blame him. But when you back up and look at the totality, including the names of his sons, which meant that God had made him fruitful in a strange land, but also had made him forget the pains that he'd experienced. But also you look and see how he responded to them. Even in the beginning, it's like God put me here, set me up. There's a terrible famine. I can save you. Like, I went through all this, but I'm in a position to save all of you. And here they are 17 years later, and they're bringing it back up again. It's like they don't get him. I mean, this is the weeping of a man who realizes, you don't know me at all. You don't understand anything. Here he is. He's been taking care of all of them. He's set all this stuff in place, and they're still scared of him. Also, it means that they've never really forgiven themselves. And he just breaks down and crying, and they all come forward. Like, Joseph's upset. We're trying to just get forgiveness. He's upset. Upset people do crazy things. Let's show up now. That was wise. I mean, I give them credit for that. I mean, they don't understand Joseph. They clearly don't understand grace or mercy. But they did understand humility. They did understand how to humble themselves. They understood fear. And he's like, you don't understand. Like, don't be afraid. Am I in God's place? Is it my place to judge you? It's like, it's not. As for you, you meant evil, but God meant it for good. This is very similar to what Jesus was telling Pilate. Like, Pilate's asking Jesus all these questions, and Jesus isn't answering. He's like, you're not going to answer me? Don't you realize I have the power of life and death over you? And Jesus is like, you couldn't have any power if it wasn't given to you from above. And Joseph is saying the same thing. You couldn't have done it if God hadn't had a plan to use it for. God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result. To keep many people alive. God meant a terrible thing that was done to somebody who didn't deserve it to bring about life for many. This is a recurring theme for God. It's what he does. Also, this is another case where someone in the line of Abraham was set up as an example of what God was willing to do. Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac. He was told to offer his only son and was not required to give up his son, just had to be willing. God is willing and does offer his son. Like we see Judah offering himself up and doesn't have to, but he does so and proves the heart and saves his brothers. And then we see this again where Joseph was basically given up, lost. If you look at the prodigal son story, it's this whole idea he's been gone, he's been dead, but he's alive again. There's a whole resurrection parallel going on here, along with the sacrifice of an innocent, but also God sending someone ahead to provide a place. There are so many pictures here. Therefore, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. Again, this is before the law. This is before God had to tell everybody, like, you don't punish the children for the father's mistakes. Joseph's in the position to wipe them all out, down to the youngest. And he's like, I'm going to provide for you and your little ones. We're going to make sure that the name of Israel goes on and on and on. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And I think I love that line. He comforted them and he spoke kindly to them. He had the right to do so different. And he spoke kindly to them. And there's an example. There's an example to try to follow. Now Joseph stayed in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Now remember, he moved to Egypt when he was 17. And Joseph saw the third generation of Ephraim's sons, also the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. And here's an interesting thing. This expression, born on Joseph's knees, I talked about this a little bit last week, but it's like he was like born unto him, or he took them as his own. We know that Jacob put Ephraim above Manasseh, but there's still this point where Manasseh's descendants were specially recognized by Joseph. So it's like, Jacob put Ephraim over you, but you're still my firstborn son. Doesn't undermine what Jacob did, but it's still, I can see the firstborn son having a problem with that. not being sure where that puts him. But there's a very clear point here where Joseph is saying, I value you, I value yours, that they're as my own. Jacob didn't make you less, he just set Ephraim as more. I'm just reading a lot in there, but it's included and it's not there on accident. Joseph said to his brothers, and he was the second youngest. Only Benjamin was younger than him. And his brothers, these people lived forever. But he said to his brothers, and that word brothers may mean his literal 11 other brothers, or it may mean their families and the families of his brothers. He said, I am about to die, but God will assuredly take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, some translations actually say God will surely come to your aid. And I find that very interesting. Because quite a bit of time has come even from, this is way past the time of the famine. And it just makes me wonder exactly what he's thinking. Does he have some hint of what's coming that they'll need to be rescued from? Or is this just a, he will take you and bring you out of this land? There is another reminder here, though. Just as Jacob was doing with Joseph, this isn't home. This was a place that God brought us to provide for us, but this isn't home. Home is this land that God promised us. So as Joseph is passing, he's making sure that the rest of everybody knows that God will surely take care of you and bring you out of this land and into the land he promised. A promise to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will assuredly take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. And this is an interesting thing. It doesn't say bury me over there. I think that Egypt probably would have resented that. He was such a major player in Egyptian politics and hierarchy, that to bury him anywhere else would have been kind of a snub to the Egyptians themselves. But he's saying, when God comes and takes you, take my bones too. This is the declaration that even though he's all he is here, what he truly values is the promise that God has made. Now, part of that promise, because we look at the promised land, but part of the promised land is also that when he said to Abraham, you'll go and you'll possess this land, and I will make you a great nation, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. So part of this promised land is not just the land, but that land is required in order to have this promised, the Messiah, to come. Now, I don't know how much they knew about that, but we know that they know that God has a Redeemer, someone to... Well, Job said it, I know my Redeemer lives. Everything that Joseph has in Egypt is great, and he's grateful for, but he's still saying, that's, even for me, that's still home. When God brings you out, don't leave me here. That's where I put my hope. That's where my bones belong. And that's huge. It's something that he'll never... he's obviously not going to be around. He's not my body, but my bones. Carry my bones up from here. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. And that is the end of the book of Genesis. Where we pick up from here, we've already done the study on Exodus, because I don't do things in order, apparently. I will point out just one little thing about Genesis to Exodus. If you look at the story of Joseph, which, by the way, is like the longest continuous narrative for any one individual in the entire Bible. I think even Jesus didn't, unless you count all four Gospels together. The story of Joseph is huge. It is enormous. But we look at Joseph, and we find that he is a shepherd who has a call on his life to be a deliverer, goes through some hard times, and ends up as a prince of Egypt and saves Israel, delivers Israel from a hard time. Then we go into Exodus, and we have Moses, who is adopted and starts off as a prince of Egypt, goes through a hard time and becomes a shepherd, and then delivers Israel from a hard time. So we've got God basically saying, I can take you from low and bring you high, or I can take you from high and bring you low, but if I'm going to deliver, I'm going to deliver. I just always loved that Joseph was a shepherd, became a prince, delivered, and Moses was a prince, became a shepherd, and then delivered. And they're like back-to-back stories. It's just always fun. Anyway, so kind of a recap of Genesis, and let's go back to, just for presentation's sake. In Genesis, one of the things that we've got, it's an enormous layout of history. It's an enormous introduction to God interacting with individuals, God establishing things, God establishing who He is. We have from the very beginning the Adam and Eve that He created mankind, put them in the garden, and then you see that at the creation of man that He did it to have a relationship with them. It wasn't like He just set them out and let them go. Like you can tell just from the story of the fall that He walked through the garden in the cool of the evening, and it was His footsteps were a sound that they recognized. They recognized it and hid in this particular case. But even when He confronts them and He asks Adam, "What did you do?" Ask Eve, "Why did you do this?" This is a conversation He had with the serpent. No conversation. He just laid out the punishment. But before He presented the punishment, the judgment for their wrongdoing, in the curse with the serpent, He provided for the Messiah to come. The seed of the woman that would crush the head of the serpent is the very first promise of a Redeemer. And it's before He even pronounced judgment on Adam and Eve. Now they knew they were guilty, but He hadn't passed sentence yet. So, and then He goes and deals with Adam and Eve. But even then, as they've ruined everything He set out for them, and He has to get them out and away from the tree of life so that they can be redeemed eventually, it's not like He completely wrote them off and never had anything to do with them. He still spoke to them. He still dealt with them. He provided their first real clothes, real covering. It's like, yes, you've messed up. Yes, you've removed yourself from what we had, but I've not abandoned you. I've not left you just naked in the world, literally. And then we move on and we see case after case after case, like the famous story of Cain and Abel, where Cain is the first murderer, murders his own brother. And as we examine the story, we see that before he did it, God actually went to him and just begged him, like, you need to be careful. Sin is waiting to destroy you if you don't master it. And he kills Abel anyway. And then, I don't know how many of you have heard the story this way, but the mark that was put on Cain's head, I grew up believing that mark was the mark of the curse of Cain. But when you read the text, Cain cries out, it's like, this curse that you've put on me, that he's a stranger in his own land. It's like, anyone who sees me will murder me. It's like, no, they won't. God's like, I'm the one dealing with you. And He put the mark as a mark of protection, so that anyone who murdered Cain would get 7 times the punishment. And here we have the very first murderer, and God's judged him, but God protected him. And I think so often we miss this aspect of God. And we get Abraham, we get Isaac, we get Jacob, we get Joseph. And we see over and over and over again people that God has called, the characteristics that God approves of in those people, but every one of them messes up, like royally, literally royally occasionally. And God just keeps going. He rolls through. He deals with the consequences of their choices. And once He's kind of let those things settle out, then He brings them back to where He called them, and He starts over again. We keep seeing Him reestablish His covenant with Abraham multiple times. Isaac, did it at least twice. Jacob, over and over and over, they kept going back to the place where God met them and kept reestablishing this thing. It's like God doesn't give up on his own. He keeps calling us back to the place where he met us, and he says, okay, now let's pick it up. It's kind of like the teacher who's in the classroom. The kids come in all rowdy. He says, nope, go back to the door, come back in right. They get messed up. Nope, come on, let's do it again. Just keep doing it and keep doing it. It's never a get out and I'll never see you again. It's always, let's come back to where we're supposed to be and let's do it right this time. And if it doesn't work this generation, he'll do it with the next generation and then the next generation. Genesis is the story of the love of God for his people, his patience, his passionate desire to establish a relationship with mankind and to establish a pattern that would ultimately lead to the Messiah who would mend the broken relationship or provide the way. And all of it points to coming back to the Father. All of it points to the relationship with the Father. All of it points to learning to trust his word the way he says it rather than the way we interpret it. We so often look and think of the New Testament as nearly as the beginning and the end of understanding the grace of God because of Christ. In fact, a lot of Christians completely disregard the Old Testament in general because that's the Old Covenant. We live in the New Covenant, so that doesn't matter. What I think most people don't realize, one, is that God's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So everything that you see in Jesus, all the things that we love about Jesus, Jesus was the reflection of the Father. He's been like that since the beginning. That's the way John starts off. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. This is who God has always been, if we'll go back and look for him. But also, so we completely miss that everything that is Jesus, everything that is Christ is the Father, and it's all through the Old Testament. All through it. The other part of it is that we put so much emphasis on the New Testament, we don't even realize a lot of times that the beginning church didn't have the New Testament. All they had was the Old Testament. So all of the New Testament is based on the Holy Spirit's interpretation of the Old Testament. All of this that we've got, this is how they did it. Well, they didn't know that at the time. Most of the New Testament wasn't even fully pinned down and collected till the church had been established for over 100 years. So I guess one of the nutshells, probably, this is the nutshell probably, but Genesis is just this beautiful picture to me that Jesus really has been there since the beginning. The grace, the love of God, but also to me, undeniable evidence that God has called people into relationship. Because he didn't just drop a stone with instructions. He kept showing up. He kept meeting them. The times that he showed up, like God and two angels showed up at Abraham to have a face-to-face conversation. The burning bushes in Exodus, but the time Jacob struggling with this encounter he's about to have with Esau, and the angel of the Lord shows up and wrestles with him. Comes there, makes contact. It's this connection, gives him a new name. God is not some God that's some far distant whatever or some lifeless idol. God is an interactive Father. And he's been that way since the beginning. Like the creation story, the entire thing is set up to let us know that he originally created us to be with him. He created the Garden of Eden the way we would create a nursery for a child that we're expecting. So, in the heart of these questions, it's like, where is the God of love? He's everywhere. I mean, in the most wrathful judgment that he pronounces, look before and after. You'll find him. Why did he preserve these things in his word? We see evidence over and over and over and over and over again of his love, of his compassion, of his patience, his grace. But again, that desire for that personal relationship. Not just I'm related to him, but he speaks to, he hears, and is heard. And if that was true before the gifting of the Holy Spirit, how much more so now? I don't think any of us are really operating in the gift that's available, because I don't think any of us really grasp exactly how badly God wants it. I mean, it's not something that we've got to like struggle and work and strive and perfect in ourselves to be able to achieve this level of whatever. It's something that God has wanted to bless us with. It's just a matter of, can we take what he's given us and trust his love and trust that he is who he says he is, and be willing to step out in our day-to-day, because that's where he's calling us. So, on that note, that finishes Genesis this time. But I encourage you to look for these things. Ask these questions in anything that you read. Take the next book and the next book and the next book and find that God of love, because he's alive and well and active. And God is calling us to be like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God's calling us to be like Joseph. God's calling us to be like Judah, to be like Christ. And he's not calling us from a distance. He's calling us from right here. And if we stray, we come back to where he's called us, and he's there. So on that note, just the second time, go find him. Go find the God of love. Here's a hint. He's right next to you, and he's calling you. So until next time, God bless. And